Hey everybody, it's Nate Charles. I'm back with another thought of the day. It's September 30th, 2025. Today's thought of the day is a little bit nuanced and a little bit complex, so I'm going to get right into it. We keep hearing a lot of noise about manhood from the MAGA crowd, but let's be honest, manhood isn't about stockpiling AR-15s. It's not about snorting lines of pre-workout, shaving your chest, or growing the thickest beard in the room. It's also not about spray tans. It's not about plastic surgery. It's not about military grooming standards, and it sure as hell isn't about fireworks at a funeral. None of that is strength. None of that is manhood. That is performance. It's insecurity, frail masculinity dressed up as real masculinity. And honestly, that is the perfect distillation of what MAGA is and always has been. MAGA isn't a political party in the traditional sense. It has no real principles. It has no coherent platform, no vision for the future. It is a party of grievance at best. It's a movement of people who, by and large, have failed at the traditional markers of success in life. And instead of working to build something better, their idea is to lash out, to tear down the system that's made them feel bad about themselves. And because of the internet, they've been able to find each other. They've metastasized into something bigger. In an earlier era, without social media, these folks would have been isolated, ignored, cut off. But today, they have an echo chamber, and grievance at scale can start to look like a movement, even a political party. Now, I want to pause here and give some credit to a good friend of mine, Dan Barkov. Dan and I go way back. We were classmates at the Naval Academy. We were SEAL officers together. We were even roommates in San Diego, California, while we were grinding through buds. Dan recently wrote a Substack that I think hits the mark. It's called "We Have to Ask Young Men for Something." And he's right. Dan's point is that the young men who drift into extremism often share a common thread. Nobody ever asks anything of them. They weren't asked to serve, to mentor, to contribute. And when nobody needs you, you don't feel valued. That corrosion of worth turns into resentment, and resentment curdles into grievance. Guns and online extremism step in to fill the void. What young men crave, Dan argues, is responsibility, to be needed, to be asked. And when society fails to ask, some of them end up making themselves matter in the worst ways possible. I also need to give credit to another voice, someone who goes by the online handle The Dark Left. He's based in New York, though I don't know his real identity. I'm paraphrasing here because I've lost track of the video to which I'm referring here, but in one of his videos, he made a powerful point. It's useless to engage with MAGA using facts and logic. That's not the paradigm they operate in. MAGA runs on feelings. If you try to hit them with facts that disprove their assumptions, they'll just twist it, using logical fallacies, rhetorical tricks, whatever it takes to bring the conversation back to where they're comfortable. Their feelings, usually feelings of grievance. And that makes sense when you think about MAGA as the party of grievance. Grievance isn't rational. It's not grounded in Aristotelian logic. It's not about genuine analysis of society's problems. Grievance is a feeling, specifically the feeling of being wrong, left out, diminished. It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters that they feel it. And you see that same obsession with feelings and appearances in how MAGA leaders themselves talk. Take Pete Hegseth's recent, rare, and frankly unprecedented assembly of generals and admirals at Quantico. Now, you'd expect the Secretary of Defense, or as he's self-rebranded, the Secretary of War, to use that stage to talk about grand strategy, to lay out how America should confront China, Russia, cyber threats, instability in the Middle East, something that actually matters to the role of the world's sole remaining superpower. But what did he choose to focus on? Grooming standards. He stood there before the most senior commanders in the U.S. military, railing against fat generals and beardos. Those were his words. No more fat generals, no more beardos. The era of unacceptable appearance is over. And then he kept repeating the same phrase. It's not a good look. It's not a good look. It's not a good look. Think about that. In front of an unprecedented gathering of generals, his big idea, his priority was whether their beards and waistlines were a good look. Not strategy, not readiness, not policy, appearances. Appearances. That tells you everything. This is a movement that's about superficiality, not substance. And it makes perfect sense because you cannot look at an assembly of MAGA politicians without seeing millions of dollars in plastic surgery. You can't look at Republican leadership without seeing people who care more about how they look than whether they're doing the right thing. It's literally stitched into their faces. And at the top of it all, Donald Trump himself is a walking advertisement for spray tans and comb over. Grievance is about how you feel, and superficiality is about how you look, and they are intimately tied together. Neither has anything to do with real strength, real leadership, or real manhood. And this is where I need to tie this back into the idea of manhood. Because real manhood is about shouldering burdens for others, making room for people who have been traditionally marginalized and oppressed. Real manhood is about courage, the courage to make room for others. It's about the courage to shoulder the burdens of people who aren't yourself. It's the courage to think outside yourself and your own self-interest. It's the courage to make room for others, particularly people who have been traditionally marginalized and cast aside. Manhood is about courage to face hard truths. Manhood is about the courage to confront evidence that contradicts your feelings about the world. That's where the MAGA brand of manhood collapses. They don't even operate on assumptions because assumptions at least suggest some level of analysis. No, MAGA operates on pure grievance, on pure feeling. And when the facts contradict those feelings, they don't wrestle with the truth, they reject it, they twist it, they turn it into yet another form of grievance. Real manhood is about having the courage to say, I was wrong. The evidence shows me something different. My feelings don't define my reality. That's courage. That's what it means to grow, to lead, and to serve. I'll give you an example from my own life. Years ago, when I was a federal prosecutor, I was in court for a status conference in a case involving a man accused of working as an agent of a foreign power. I got up and spoke for several minutes to the judge about the strength of our evidence as it related to a pretrial decision that the judge had to make that day. I don't even recall what the exact decision was, but I remember what happened next. When I sat down, the lead FBI agent leaned over to me and he said, hey, just to let you know, it wasn't quite like that. It was a little bit different. And what he told me actually weakened the argument that I had just made. At that moment, I realized I had a duty. So I waited until defense counsel finished speaking, and then I stood up and said, Your Honor, I have to correct the record. I was wrong. The lead FBI agent just clarified something for me, and here's the truth. I will not sit here as a federal prosecutor with the full weight of the government behind me and allow a misstatement that was entirely my fault to impede this man's rights. That's not my job. My job wasn't to win. It was to do the right thing. And that is the job of anyone who is in government. I'll tell you this. I'm more proud of that moment than almost any victory I achieved as a prosecutor, because that was my example of manhood. Because that's where I lived up to the examples of manhood that have been set for me in my life. That was courage. That was the willingness to face a hard truth, even when it cut against my position. Now here's the nuance. The hardcore MAGA base, they're not salvable. They've built their entire identity around grievance. They will never give up anything for anyone else. But orbiting around them is a larger group, a group who've glommed on to MAGA without fully understanding it. And for them, Dan's challenge matters. We can pull some of them back from the brink by asking something of them, by giving them a purpose and responsibility, by inviting them into a life where service replaces grievance. And that's the bigger picture. For much of American history, young men were asked to serve, whether in the military, in civic life, or in extended family networks. They were expected to shoulder burdens larger than themselves. That expectation has been eroded. Dan is right. And when the answer to who needs me becomes nobody, the psyche corrodes. Dan is right. We need to ask young men for something. And the dark left is right. We'll never argue MAGA out of grievance with facts and logic, because grievance is a feeling, not a position. And now we see it plain as day. When a Secretary of War stands in front of the nation's generals and talks about beards instead of strategy, it shows us what MAGA is really about. Superficiality, grievance, and insecurity. But we can't offer a counterweight. We can offer purpose. We can rebuild a culture that asks young men to serve, to give, to face hard truths, to carry burdens, and to put others first. That's real manhood. That's courage. That's strength.